Hello, and welcome to English for Philosophy students. We are in our study of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We are in lesson number 58 and number 11 of our study of rule number 7, which is that we should choose that which is meaningful rather than that which is expedient. Last week, we looked at the first temptation of Jesus Christ, which is in the beginning of the Gospels. And Jordan is making a comparison between the temptation of Jesus and the temptation of Cain and Abel, one of the first stories in the Old Testament. Cain was the first son mentioned of Adam and Eve, and he became a murderer. So he succumbed to temptation. He fell to temptation. And in that story, evil won. Abel, who was the hero, supposedly, and who was good, and who understood that sacrifice brings blessing. In the end, Abel died and lost. And the evil character, Cain, won. And according to Jordan, that shows that at that stage of philosophical development, mankind could not understand the nature of the victory of good over evil. And it took thousands of years for Jesus Christ to come and enact a story that exemplified what it means to defeat evil and to defeat death and hell. And now, from this vantage point of philosophical history, we understand more about what is meaningful as opposed to what is expedient. So we are looking at the temptations of Christ. This is the place where Jesus Christ metaphorically met and identified with the full depth of evil, all the way to facing the devil himself. This is a depth to which most of us never go, and therefore our corresponding comprehension of heaven and goodness is less. Supposedly, you must understand evil to be able to understand the corresponding breadth of goodness. Anyway, let's continue with the second temptation of Christ. Okay. Throw yourself off that cliff, Satan says, offering the next temptation. If God exists, he will surely save you. If you are in fact his son, God will surely save you. So, part of the temptation was to prove to everyone that Jesus was the unique Son of God by claiming and forcing an attention from God that normal people might not get. Normally, if you throw yourself off a cliff, you will die. But surely God will save you if you are uniquely his son. So prove it to all of us by throwing yourself down. Why would God not make himself manifest to rescue his only begotten child from hunger and isolation and the presence of great evil? Let me explain this one sentence before we move on. Make himself manifest. Why would God not show himself in a way that doesn't require faith? Because almost all of the ways God intervenes in our world require some degree of faith. Usually God does not show himself openly, but the devil is suggesting to Jesus that God would break his own rule and manifest himself in order to rescue his only begotten child. This only begotten child thing shows the uniqueness that Jesus was claiming for himself. In some respect, we are all the children of God, but Jesus is unique in some way. He is the only one that God became the father to, begot. To beget means to become the father of. So, why would God not make himself manifest to rescue his only begotten child from hunger and isolation and the presence of great evil? Personally, it has long been clear to me. That means I have thought it was clear for a long time that things I think are bad, like hunger, isolation, and the presence of evil, things which are uncomfortable to me, may be God's will for the moment. They may be good in God's plan for the moment. So we say, why should God not rescue him? Maybe God didn't want to rescue him. Maybe Jesus' situation was God's plan. That's my thought. Let's continue to read Jordan Peterson's thought. Okay. Why would God not make himself manifest to rescue his only begotten child from hunger and isolation and the presence of evil, great evil? Okay, here Jordan is saying, but that establishes no pattern for life. So remember, Jesus is here to demonstrate something new, a new way of living, which is more meaningful than the previous. And to simply be rescued from suffering doesn't show us anything. Jordan says, it doesn't even work as literature. The Deus ex machina, so the God who comes into the system, the emergence of a divine force that magically rescues the hero from his predicament, is the cheapest trick in the hack writer's playbook. A hack is an inferior kind of person. The hack writer is a lousy writer, a bad quality writer. The cheapest trick in his playbook means it's just not something that requires skill and subtlety and creates a great product. So if we're looking at this story as a groundbreaking, revolutionary myth that shows the emergence of a new level of philosophical understanding about how to conquer death, just being rescued from suffering, from hunger and isolation, that would make this not a good story. It wouldn't be any good at all. Okay, so the emergence of a divine force that magically rescues the hero from his predicament is the cheapest trick in the hack writer's playbook. It makes a mockery of independence and courage and destiny and free will and responsibility. All of these things go into the conquest of evil, the victory over death itself. Furthermore, God is in no wise a safety net. In no wise means not in any way. There is nothing about God that is like a safety net. God is not a safety net. Emphasize not. And a lot of people who are thoughtless and uneducated in philosophy, or maybe they are speaking from a broken heart and angry emotions, say, why did God allow this bad thing to happen to me or to my loved one? He doesn't exist. Either God doesn't exist or he is evil and bad because he allowed this to happen. And the thing that happened is something that happens every day. Maybe the loved one was killed in a car accident, or maybe the loved one got cancer, or maybe the loved one, whatever bad thing. These things happen, but people seem to think that God should be a safety net. And that if he isn't, I'm not a Christian anymore. But Jordan here is emphasizing that God never promises to be a safety net in any way. In fact, Jesus promises when he's on earth that his disciples will have troubles, not that they will be immune. So if ever you're tempted to think God is going to save you from some catastrophe, don't count on it. Maybe he will, but not necessarily. Okay, so furthermore, God is in no wise a safety net for the blind, those who blind in what sense are we saying here? People who get themselves into trouble needlessly? For the blind. He's not, meaning God is not someone to be commanded to perform magic tricks or forced into self-revelation. Remember that word? Why wouldn't God make himself manifest? That's forced into self-revelation, making himself manifest. Not even by his own son. So God, it is not appropriate for anyone to command God to perform miracles or magic. When you or I tell God to do something, especially for our preference, it's like trying to perform magic. Magicians are in control. Christians are never in control. Christians allow God to be in control. And as Jesus showed us in another place, Christians say, thy will be done. Your will be done, God, in me. Whereas magicians say, my will be done. It is a total opposite. So here it says, God is not someone to be commanded to perform magic, and God is not someone who can be forced to reveal himself. My ex-husband, when he was rather new as a Christian, was unhappy because other people claimed that they saw God working in their lives or doing miracles or even visions sometimes. And he never had that. He never felt like he heard the voice of God or saw any hard evidence of God. So he decided that he was going to go on a hunger strike and go out into the woods with a tent and a sleeping bag and refuse to come in or eat until God manifested himself, until God revealed himself. So my husband, as a young man, he lasted about 3 days, and then he gave up and came in. He never saw God. You can't force God to do things. Next paragraph. Do not put the Lord your God to the test. So that is what Jesus said to the devil when the devil tempted Jesus to throw himself down and force God to rescue him, thereby making it clear to everyone that Jesus was the unique Son of God, forcing God to rescue Jesus. Jesus said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Now, this was a scripture verse, a verse from the Old Testament. Jesus responded to the devil with verses from the Bible, which most people say is a good idea if the devil speaks to you. Anyway, so Jordan says, this answer, though rather brief, dispenses with the second temptation. Okay, though indicates something contrary to expectation. So, this answer dispenses with the second temptation. So, dispenses with means overcomes it, puts it aside, says no to it. We can take this phrase out of the middle, though rather brief, and understand that one might expect that to dispense with this temptation, you might need to say more words. You may need to argue more. But no. Very brief answer was sufficient. Unexpectedly, you only need a short sentence. Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. No, thou shalt not put the Lord thy God to the test. Thou shalt not test the Lord thy God. Christ does not casually order or even dare ask God to intervene on his behalf. So, important word there is casually. Casually means almost like commonly. Christ does not use God for common purposes. For example, in your life and mine, if I say, God, will you get me a taxi cab? Or God, will you make it not rain today so that I can have a picnic? Or something like that. There's no problem. I feel it's okay to ask, but you would not command. You would not be too serious about it. At least Christ does not casually order or even dare ask God to intervene on his behalf. A wise friend of mine who was a big influence on me when I was young as a Christian once told me that if something is big enough to hang a wish upon, so like think of a hook on the wall and you can hang your coat on it. If something is big enough to hang a wish upon, then it is big enough to hang a prayer upon. She was encouraging me to pray freely to God about anything I wished for. So that is a little different than what Jordan is saying about Jesus. So we can move on. I don't know. I think that Jesus would approve of our praying for small things as well as large. But I do not think he would approve of our authoritatively commanding and demanding anything other than the establishment of God's will in the earth, which is what he will do. Okay, Christ does not casually order or even dare ask God to intervene on his behalf. He refuses to dispense with his responsibility for the events of his own life. So to dispense with means to put aside. He refuses to put aside responsibility for the events of his own life. So Jesus is out in the desert, fasting, hungry, isolated, and meeting with the devil. And all this is Jesus' responsibility. He is not going to put it off on God. He refuses to demand that God prove his presence, make himself manifest. He refuses as well to solve the problems of mortal vulnerability in a merely personal manner by compelling God to save him, because that would not solve the problem for everyone else and for all time. Okay, so Jordan is suggesting that Jesus perhaps is self-consciously choosing to enact this myth, to enact this breakthrough demonstration of how to overcome evil. He is also pointing out that Jesus does not demand that God prove his existence. He does not solve the problems of mortal vulnerability. So this is the problem of hunger, of lonely isolation, and of evil. In a merely personal manner, like make it stop for Jesus. Because that would not solve the problem for everyone else and for all time. There is also the echo of the rejection of the comforts of insanity in this foregone temptation. Okay, so the echo of. So that means it is not clearly there, it is not explicit, but you definitely get the feeling that Jesus is rejecting the comfort of insanity. Now, if you throw yourself down off a cliff, you are committing suicide. Anyone who commits suicide is insane. And if you are insane, you are not responsible for anything And you can be rescued even against your own will. That would be a way to make the pain stop without taking personal responsibility for giving up. But Jesus doesn't do that in this foregone temptation. Foregone means he has dispensed with it. He has decided to forego the joy of relief from his suffering. Forego means choose to say no thank you. Easy but psychotic self-identification as the merely magical Messiah might well have been a genuine temptation under the harsh conditions of Christ's sojourn in the desert. Okay, easy but psychotic. All right, so easy means this is a way to make my pain stop and I won't be responsible. Yeah, I can do this easily with no effort. So it's easy. But it's psychotic, meaning it is not in keeping with reality. And what is not in keeping with reality? The self-identification as the merely magical Messiah. So if he threw himself down, God would have to magically and miraculously cause him to not kill himself. So bear him up on angel's wings and set him down gently. This is not how it is. Therefore, it would be psychotic. And usually, crazy people who think God is going to save them if they jump off the top of a building end up dying at the bottom. Maybe that would have happened to Jesus had he succumbed to that temptation. So easy but psychotic self-identification as the merely magical Messiah might well have been a genuine temptation. So he's saying, maybe Jesus was really tempted by this. Maybe this is something Jesus thought about as a way to end his own suffering without having to take responsibility for it. Maybe in the harshness of the desert, the hunger, the thirst, the sun, the loneliness, and the terrible evil of the devil, maybe Jesus really could have considered this way out of suicide. And who knows, maybe God would bear him up. So he's saying maybe this was really a temptation, a genuine temptation, under the harsh conditions of Christ's sojourn in the desert. Instead of giving into this, he rejects the idea that salvation from his sufferings, or even survival, like maybe he would die in the desert, or even survival in the short term, depends on narcissistic displays of superiority. So if he were to throw himself down, depending on God to bear him up, that would be saying, I am the unique Son of God, and you, God, must prove it now on my terms, because if you don't, I will kill myself. So that would be a narcissistic, so self-focused, display of superiority. I am the unique Son of God. And the commanding of God, even by his Son. Okay, so instead, he rejects all this. He rejects the idea that salvation, or even salvation depends on him doing these things and commanding God, even as the Son of God. So that's the second temptation for Jesus. Now comes the third temptation. All right. Finally comes the third temptation, and the most compelling of all. Christ sees the kingdoms of the world laid before him for the taking. That's the siren call of earthly power. Okay, so remember, Jesus right now is sitting at the right hand of the Father and is in charge, basically the prince of all the kingdoms of the world. It was his birthright. But the devil also has a claim to being the prince of this world. And so the devil offered to give Jesus power, the power the devil had. And this is the siren call. You know the sirens. I want to say, was it Odysseus in the Greek classics that lashed himself to the mainsail staff post thing so that he could listen to the call of the sirens and hear the beautiful music calling him to the island, and yet not be able to go and die there. The siren call is something very attractive, very compelling, something which draws you almost irresistibly. So, the kingdoms of the world laid before him is the siren call of earthly power. Jesus has heavenly power. That's more meaningful. Earthly power is expedient. We are to learn to choose what is better, what is meaningful, and Jesus is our model. So, the third temptation was the siren call of earthly power, the opportunity to control and order everyone. By order, that doesn't mean give them orders. That means put them in the order you want them to be. You're on the bottom, you're on the top. Order everyone and everything. Now remember, in the Garden of Eden, the first thing God did was to give to man, meaning Adam, the authority to order creation. He invited him to name the animals. He also commanded him to fill the earth and subdue it. That means to order it, to control it, to make it productive as the representative of God on earth. So human beings, through our very nature and birthright from God, have the responsibility to order everything, but not like the devil does. The devil uses power to subjugate everything and everybody. And so the devil was offering Jesus a counterfeit. He was offering Jesus what is expedient, when Jesus already really had what was meaningful. That was the true power to order and command nature and creation, but only in his Father's will, not in his own will. Difference between magic and miracle, the difference between a magician and a Christian, or Jesus himself. So, Christ is offered the pinnacle of the dominance hierarchy, the animalistic desire of every naked ape, the obedience of all, the most wondrous of estates, the power to build and to increase, the possibility of unlimited sensual gratification. That's expedience writ large. So that's like uber expedience. Jesus was offered the greatest level of satisfaction of the animal urges of mankind that could be imagined. Uber expedience. But that's not all. Such expansion of status also provides unlimited opportunity for the inner darkness to reveal itself. The lust for blood, rape, and destruction is very much part of power's attraction. It is not only men that desire power so that they will no longer... it is not only that men desire power so that they will no longer suffer. It is not only that they desire power so that they can overcome subjugation to want, disease, and death. Power also means the capacity to take vengeance, ensure submission, and crush enemies. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. So if you have that much power, your inner darkness will reveal itself. The lust for blood, rape, and destruction is part of power's attraction. So, and then from here on, it is not only that men desire power so that they will no longer suffer. Okay, so we have a pattern sentence with different things inserted at the end. The idea is men want power for certain reasons. One reason is that they will no longer suffer, to escape suffering. But that's not the only reason. Another one is that they can not be subjugated to want, disease, and death. Want means poverty. Poverty, disease, and death. They want to escape it. That's one reason. But that's not the only reason. And now we see what another reason is. Power also means the capacity to take vengeance, ensure submission, and crush enemies. In English rhetoric, we usually have 3 examples. That's what feels right to the English-speaking reader. So, the desire to no longer suffer is benign and understandable and not sinful. Maybe. The desire to escape want, disease, and death is also ultimately God's plan. God does not want us to be poor and sick and to die. God is against those things. So the desire to overcome those is understandable and benign and kind of good. But there is a much darker result of unlimited power. It enables you to take vengeance, ensure submission, like make everybody obey you, and crush your enemies. These are active evils. At least I think this is what Jordan is trying to say. And now he goes on to say, grant Cain enough power, grant meaning give Cain enough power, and he will not only kill Abel, he will torture him first, imaginatively and endlessly. So, if Cain has plenty of power, his evil anger will express itself more. He will not only murder, he will first torture. He will torture endlessly before he kills. The evil inside man is very great, and the more power you give, the more evil is expressed. Then and only then will he kill him. Then he will come after everyone else. So Cain will not only kill Abel, who he bears a grudge towards, he will then become a murderer that murders everybody. Keep reading. There's something above, even the pinnacle of the highest of dominance hierarchies, access to which should not be sacrificed for mere proximal success. Okay. The pinnacle of the highest of dominance hierarchies. That is what the devil offered Jesus, the pinnacle of human power, earthly power. Jordan says there is something above that. Heavenly power, spiritual power, something more meaningful, something more good. There is something above, even the pinnacle of the highest of dominance hierarchies, access to which should not be sacrificed. So access to this thing, the something which is above, should not be sacrificed for mere proximal success. Proximal means immediate, close success. I'll give you a quick example. I have a son who has great talent in business and also in dominance, in controlling people. He has the power to become wealthy, and he has the innate ability to become wealthy and successful. He also is a Christian and he wants to do good for the kingdom of God and be the best man he can be and be godly. And often he has to choose between his ability to succeed in the eyes of the world and gain money and power for himself, or be a servant of God. And what Jordan is saying is, being a servant of God should not be sacrificed. It is more valuable than the immediate joys of power and privilege and money and such on earth. That's what he's saying. Okay, there is something above, even the pinnacle, the highest of the dominance hierarchies, access to which should not be sacrificed for mere proximal success. So do not sacrifice the meaningful for the expedient. It's a real place too. I think this might mean heaven, but I don't think it means after you die. I think it means heaven exists ontologically. This spiritual world exists. The value and benefits exist. It's a real place too, although not to be conceptualized in the standard geographical sense of place we typically use to orient ourselves. So he's trying to say that this being in heaven, this heavenly lifestyle, this quality of life which is meaningful and heavenly, is real. It's a real place to be, although it's not geographically located. I had a vision once of an immense landscape, very large plot of land, immense landscape, spread for miles out to the horizon before me. I was high in the air, granted a bird's eye view. So I could see everything for miles. Everywhere I could see great stratified, multi-storied pyramids of glass. So all over the place there were these pyramids. Some small, some large, some overlapping, some separate. You know, pyramids are those things in Egypt where they buried the pharaohs. They're made like a triangle. So there were lots of them around, some overlapping each other, some separate, all akin to modern skyscrapers. Okay, so similar to how we have buildings, skyscrapers, big buildings, all full of people striving to reach each pyramid's very pinnacle. So these are pyramids made of glass, so he can see inside of them. And inside there were people going upstairs and climbing up ladders and maybe stepping on each other, trying to get to the top inside their respective pyramid, right inside that one little pyramid. But there was something above the pinnacle, a domain outside each pyramid in which all were nested. So the pyramids were all in this area, and then outside of it, there was an even greater place. That was the privileged position of the eye that could, or perhaps chose, to soar freely above the fray. Okay, so that was the privileged position of the eye. So that vision was what I could see, but they could not see. They were not able to see what was beyond because they were inside. They were in the position of trying to get to the top of their pyramid. But I had an ability to see everything. I was, all right, that was the privileged position of the eye that could see, or perhaps chose to soar, that means fly, freely above the fray. The fray is the fight. In every pyramid, they're fighting to get to the top inside the pyramids. Okay, chose to soar freely above the fray. That chose not to dominate any specific group. So inside each pyramid, everybody was trying to get to the top so that they could be the big head of that one small group. But he, being on the outside, was not choosing that, and he could see what was really out there. This is a vision, you know, a dream. Okay. Chose not to dominate any specific group or cause, so not to dominate any group or cause, but instead to somehow simultaneously transcend them all. All of the groups inside pyramids, all of the causes like Black Lives Matter, or the Green New Deal, or global warming, or whatever the cause is. That was attention itself, pure and untrammeled. So he is saying to supersede all of these causes, to see what is above it, is to be awake. You know, the leftists call themselves woke, but they're the ones inside the pyramid. Someone who is outside is truly attentive to the bigger picture. So that was attention itself, pure and untrammeled, detached, alert, watchful attention, waiting, waiting to act when the time was right and the place had been established. As the Tao Te Ching has it, he who contrives defeats his purpose, and he who is grasping loses. The sage does not contrive to win, and therefore is not defeated. He is not grasping, and so he does not lose. There is a powerful call to proper being in the story of the third temptation. So, Jordan is saying that this is an example for us to follow, that we should, when he says we should choose what is meaningful, this is a way of being, a proper way of being. To obtain the greatest possible prize, which is the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth, the resurrection of paradise, to achieve that, the individual must conduct his or her life in a manner that requires the rejection of immediate gratification. So don't get yourself rescued from all suffering. You got to reject immediate gratification of natural and perverse desires alike. So again, this is the rejection of the gratification of both natural desires and perverse desires. So it's not just evil desires you have to say no to. It can even be good desires, like the desire for food or health. No matter how powerfully and convincingly and realistically those things are offered, like food and health and stuff. And dispense as well with the temptations of evil. So of course you must give up the temptations of evil, but also even natural desires. Evil amplifies the catastrophe of life. So life, with all of its horrible bad things, the horrible bad things are amplified by evil, increasing dramatically the motivation for expediency. Already there because of the essential tragedy of being. Okay, so evil amplifies the catastrophe of life. So whatever bad thing was going to happen, it's worse if human evil caused it. And the more you suffer, the more motivated you're going to be to choose expediency, because it would be immediate relief, you think. So, evil amplifies the catastrophe, increasing the motivation for expediency, which is already there because of the essential tragedy of being. So you're always going to be tempted toward expediency because it's relief from the essential pain of human life. And evil makes that pain even worse. Sacrifice of the more prosaic sort can keep that tragedy at bay. So this means common sacrifices, like religiously fasting in certain seasons of the church year, or giving charity, giving tithes and offerings, or maybe going to bed early so that you will feel well the next day, and giving up watching late TV. You know, these kinds of prosaic sacrifices keep the tragedy at bay. In other words, make your suffering not as immediate, more or less successfully. So prosaic sacrifices will keep tragedy at bay more or less successfully. Another example, don't do drugs and you won't become a heroin addict. So give up the pleasure of doing drugs for fun, and you will keep the tragedy of drug addiction out of your life. Okay. But it takes a special kind of sacrifice to defeat evil. It's not good enough just to not do drugs so that you don't become a drug addict. If you want to overcome an existential evil, you have to do more. It is the description of that special sacrifice that has preoccupied the Christian, and more than Christian, imagination for centuries. Why has it not had the desired effect? Okay, so it's the thought of Jesus' death on the cross, that amazing sacrifice of a perfectly sinless, pure life for the sin of mankind? And why has it not had the desired effect, which would be to save everybody? Why do we remain unconvinced that there is no better plan than lifting our eyes skyward, aiming at the good, and sacrificing everything to that ambition, which is the good, is the ambition? So why, after Jesus made the perfect sacrifice, are we still not willing to throw everything into following him? Have we merely failed to understand, or have we, fallen, willfully or otherwise, off the path? Okay, that's the end for today. And probably he'll address that question next week. See you later. Excuse me.